right. Let's see. Nope, that's not it. It's live. I'm just trying to figure out how to share it. Share.
There you go. Do you want me to post?
I'm going to post on the Facebook group.
All right, so I think we're good. There is a delay in the recording to going to YouTube.
That's okay.
I think it's like a 1.5-minute delay, Jeremy.
Yeah.
So
check the video resolution, which is not.
Yeah, it's fine.
Oh, it's just telling me my video resolution isn't optimal for some reason.
Well, yeah. I mean, if it's not 4K, it's not optimal, right?
Yeah, I suppose. Okay. Maverick Christian's on. Oh, Bobby says it's looking better than Facebook, which is good. You'll still see the screen flicker here. Again, we'll just have to deal with that. Not the greatest. Testing was decent. Obviously, this didn't go the best in actual production.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think this is going to work.
Yes, I think so. Yep, so sorry about all the difficulties. Of course, this type of thing can happen when you're really trying something out for the first time, like we are here. So thanks for staying patient through that. And we're just posting a thing or two before we start. Okay, so we can start things off. Hopefully people can join over time. I think I'll message people individually who were watching us originally as well. But this is Twin Cities Apologetics. We are an organization with the mission to equip Christians with resources to help them strengthen and defend their faith. So we do that in a few different ways. If you've been following, you know all the stuff this past week happened. So we're doing this now. So something I wanted to mention regarding the ministry is we've been just putting more focus on local stuff. We used to do a lot in terms of social media content, but we really just refocused and are doing more in terms of gathering locally, which has been just a good switch to make, I think. And for myself, in terms of content, I'm working on a new video platform, which will be more universal than just the Twin Cities, let's say. So that's an exciting thing for me. Again, I mentioned this in an earlier stream, but we're going to have some screen flickering with Matt's end, one of the technical things that came up, but that's not as bad as the stream ending, so we'll take it. So before we begin with an introduction of what we're doing tonight, I want to open with a question for you all to respond to, because that's what we do in our regular meetings, so why not do it over live stream? So I want to know, what is one of the main ways you've been affected by this coronavirus stuff? Like, what's a significant change that you've had to make? And while you're answering that, Matt and I will talk about that. For me, I am working at home, so that's been one of the biggest things. This is where I work, so I work in front of a green screen, I guess, which is kind of cool. And it's been a good transition. But probably the biggest one in terms of frustration is I can't go to my gym, which is also at work. But I was hoping that would be open, because it's one of those you just put a key card in and you can go in whenever. But it seems like I won't be able to do that at all, which is disappointing.
You'll have to pick up calisthenics, Jeremy.
What is that in a sentence or two?
That's where you just use body weight to do exercises.
Yeah, I had been doing that for quite a while in December, January. So that's good stuff too, especially when you can't get to the gym all the time, you know.
Definitely.
Good suggestion. Yeah, do you have an answer,
Yeah,
Matt?
are there any other? I do have an answer. I was going to go on a conference, not this weekend, but next weekend. Sorry, no, that's not correct. I was going to go Monday the 30th through Thursday the 2nd, and that was in California. Well, I was going to go early because the flight was actually cheaper, and then go rock climbing with a friend in Palm Springs and Joshua Tree. The conference ended up getting canceled, so now I can't, get a free conference flight there. So now I have to pay a little bit more to go or not go at all. So that was a frustrating thing. And then I'm still going into work. Maybe I'll change that, but yeah, it's not been too bad for me. I guess having the market go down was it's like my first big dip in the market since I really started investing, because what year did I get down to school? 2014, 2015. So that was, long after 2008. But just knowing that the market does that and it's going to come back up eventually is reassuring. It's just interesting to note just the panic that everyone's having, whether it's health or financial. A lot of panic.
Yeah, for sure. We could have another whole discussion about that. Is panic warranted and stuff like that? We have a few answers.
Always warranted, actually.
Okay. That sounds pretty philosophical.
Yeah, very philosophical.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. A few other people. Maverick Christian says a conference was happening where he was going to present a philosophy paper, which is a really big deal if you're in that field. That's something that really helps you to step up, and that was canceled. So yeah, that is definitely frustrating, especially it takes a long time to get to that point. Kaylee says a decrease in work hours next 2 weeks, which is depending on the circumstance maybe kind of nice in some ways. Um, and then when Joel says he's able to start working from home, but he's kind of a hermit, so
The
it's
hermit.
fine. And that's sometimes how I feel. I feel like it's not been a huge switch for me overall. And then Christine has I think I saw this elsewhere, has a daughter in dance, and uh, nine events were canceled. That's quite a big deal for St. Patrick's Day. So an Irish dancing deal.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a
So
packed Irish, day. Wow.
yeah.
Anyway, keep going.
So if it's bad for us, but think about kids who have this huge thing and then they have to have that canceled. It's a really sad thing.
See, if you're just homeschooled in the first place, this is just be status quo. I don't know. All those public schoolers just complaining all the time.
Right. I'm in public school, or I was in public school, so I'm on that side. But there's benefits to both. Absolutely. Okay, so thanks for discussing that, and this is kind of how we want this to go, just to have open discussion. And I may throw out questions during the night, during the course of our conversation, for you to respond to. So just look out for that. And otherwise, for the night, we're just going to give some insights on the topic of doubt, share some stories, and yeah, just interact with you throughout the whole time. And we don't know how long it's going to go. It's going to be very freeform. And, we have a few people in this stream right now, maybe 4 or 5. And if it stays that way, that's great. The point of this is just to have a discussion. Okay. So, Matt, would you like to pray for us before we begin?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay.
God, thank you for today. Thank you for the safety so far. We ask for your hand in all the countries in the world and those who are providing healthcare. Give wisdom to leaders as we're going through a trying time as a globe, and we pray that you would be with us and give us a sense of calm and peace as we're going through this, and also the tools to be able to handle panic, anxiety, and learn how to calm each other down when others might not be thinking straight, or when we're not. So thank you for that. I pray that you bless this time tonight and just guide us in this conversation and have a great dialogue on topics on doubt. So thank you, God. In your name, Jesus, amen.
Amen. Okay. So we're glad to see the stream is going pretty well here in terms of it running. So we're going to start out the night just first of all giving a little background to this topic of doubts. This stream is titled Tale of Two Doubters, which is kind of a catchy kind of title. But it may bring across the impression that there's something unique or that we're in a separate class, the two of us, compared to other people. But really, when it comes to Christians, I would say just about everyone doubts at some point in their lives. Now, I'm sure that's the same for non-Christians as well. I just can't speak to that quite as much. So we're not two, special people talking about this topic necessarily. I mean, we are special, but in terms of the topic itself, I think it's something that everyone goes through, at least from time to time. So with that said, Matt, specifically to this topic, has quite a history, which leads him to be, I'm not going to say an expert, but someone who has a lot to say on this topic, which I'm really
I always
excited.
have a lot to say, Jeremy. It depends if it's good or not.
Well, this will be the good one
question.
that you have to share.
This is the good one. Okay.
All right. So with that said, would you like to start sharing your story of when did you start to experience doubts, and what was that whole process like for you of going through those things?
Wow, that's quite the intro.
Yeah.
Doubt is an interesting. That's was reflecting on this before we started the live stream, and I was 11 years old, and I had some drastic action for me to go and see someone. I was like, this guy kind of had this impression that I was going through this big existential crises as like an 11-year-old. Um, I don't know if I was 11, so somewhere around there. Um, I think that was one of the earlier moments, and I remember other times of sitting awake in my bed at night when I was very young and just thinking about the universe, God, and just thinking through questions. How did this all come to be? And um, I think doubt has been with me my whole life. I don't can't think of a good time when I haven't been a little like I've never had like a good certainty forward quite a while. I I've been a very anxious person my whole life, and I didn't realize that until this past year that I have really chronic anxiety OCD stuff, and how that manifests itself in my life is something called scrupulosity, and scrupulosity is a very unique form of OCD that it drives itself from a religious context. And it forms on being obsessive about moral obligations and obsessive about um, religious ideas in general and trying to get things right. So how that came up in my life is always like concerned I wasn't doing enough. I wasn't in right standing with God. I had committed unforgivable sin. Um, Not sure if I had enough faith that God was going to um, save me. I had questions on, does God really save the Gentiles, or was it only the Jews? It, there's a whole wide gambit. Does God exist? All sorts of questions on uh, in the religious area, but it actually, for me, it spans more than just the religious area. My my anxiety OCD actually surpasses just scrupulosity, and I didn't find that out until last year when I had um, hyperstimulus stress response symptoms. So that comes when uh, you live with enough perpetual uncertainty and anxiety that it starts producing stress response symptoms in a constant fashion. And it debilitates one's ability to make decisions and handle some everyday uh, like situations. So um, what kind of led up to all of that is uh, going through transitions in my life and having a uh, increased anxiety behavior through all of it, and that is what drove these behaviors, and it's a cyclic. So that kind of answers some of that, but I should probably fill in a little bit more detail. Did that make sense, Jeremy?
Yeah. Basically, this history of you being more prone to these kind of feelings, is that the summary? Because of the
Yeah, yeah,
conditions and mhm.
right. So it's kind of like it's a
and
very
it
chronic thing for
and
me.
it's cyclical, like you said. So it kind of keeps coming back. Is it like the same kind of thoughts of, oh, I don't really know about this, and then maybe a week later, for example, it'd be like, oh, I don't really know about the same thing. Is that the idea?
Right. And so a very good example of this is I had this perpetual doubt of committing the unforgivable sin. And this carried with me a long, long time. And it started out in college, and I like would read about the unforgivable sin and that would get me all stressed. So, and I had to go talk to someone. I had to get reassurance. So I went and I talked to someone, a pastor, a theologian, a friend, and they're like, Matt, like that doesn't apply to you because of this, and this. And I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And then I felt relieved. I felt free from that. Well, what happens is a week later, that same feeling and that same concern comes up again. So I go through the whole cycle again, and that would drive my stress level up. And it's it was I need to minimize this. I'm getting distracted with the comments.
Yeah.
But okay, I'll let you handle that. So with that one specifically, it just kept being recurring, no matter how much reassurance that I would seek from people. And I think that was one of the first ones that was kind of a chronic thing for me that I was never able to shake. And there's a time period where I shook it for a few months, and that was really nice, but it came back again.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a wide gambit of other doubts, more serious, less serious than that one. But what I should emphasize is the immense amount of struggle that one goes through when they have a doubt about something that they hold very dearly. When one doubts, there's some sort of truth that you hold to, and there is some danger to that belief, and that danger drives your stress up. That stress then will affect your thinking. So how this goes is your brain is more or less in two general areas. There's the cortex, which is the top part, and that's the very rational part of your brain. And then there's the limbic system, and that's down further. And the limbic system is tied with the amygdala, and that is your stress response. So that tells you when you need to fight or flight. What happens though is if you're not using your cortex, prefrontal cortex, to set your thoughts in the right pattern, your limbic system, which is trained to take over in case of a danger, will dominate your thinking. Mm-hmm. So take, for example, the idea, the doubt of I committed the unforgivable sin. Well, that is just a statement, right? Why does that have an effect on us? Well, it has an effect on us because I hold to this idea that God is real, and I want to know God. I want to be with him. Committing the unforgivable sin is complete alienation from God, and I can't do anything from it. Mm-hmm. Matt, you're screwed. There's no hope from you. You are alone. No one can relate to you. You are forever doomed. So that all of those thoughts are almost, they start up and they're from the limbic system, and it's telling you warning, warning, warning. There is something going on here that is crucial to who you are and your safety, right? Mm-hmm. Because that idea violates my safety. Mm-hmm. I want to confide in God. I want to know that he loves me. He's going to take care of me. He's my shepherd. He has a place for me, right? Mm-hmm. By committing an unforgivable sin, that there is a danger to all of those things that I hold very, very dear. Okay, So that's what goes on in the limbic system, and that drives the brain, and that drives stress response in your body. So that is going to release hormones into your blood so that your body can respond. Now, the body is meant for fight or flight when there's a danger. Now, the interesting thing about the brain is it can't differentiate between real and perceived threats. It's very important to know. So your brain is going to respond in a manner that is aligned with the fight or flight if it perceives it or it is a threat. So there might be a saber-toothed tiger trying to kill me, and I'm going to release stress hormones, adrenaline, and that's going to allow me to react and perform an action to get me out of that situation or to fight to destroy the threat.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So how this relates to the unforgivable sin is that I have a threat. It might be true, it might not be true, but my brain doesn't know the difference. So it's going to release those stress hormones, and I'm going to get adrenaline, cortisol in my blood, and that's going to make me react. Well, what happens is your memory system functions best when there are those when you have those stress response hormones in your blood. It's full on. It wants to remember this so it can record that for later, right? Our bodies are meant to survive. So that survival instinct will remember that doubt. And then it's already stimulated, it's recorded that, and you go and seek reassurance, and that calms it down for a little bit. But now you have that neural pathway in your brain. So when you encounter something that makes you think about that, that is going to stimulate that again, because it's just a thought. It's an idea. It's not a saber-toothed tiger, right? It's actually something that's just in your head, a thought. So that's going to, that idea that you try to suppress is just going to come back, and then you're going to get stimulated. Well, your brain's going to think that that's a threat, right? And then that's going to drive all the hormones. That's going to that is going to store in your brain more reinforcement to that neural network. So it's going to fire quicker and stronger next time. And that's just going to keep going if you don't have any corrective action. Mm-hmm. So I was living years without any corrective action. I would go seek assurance, and that was about it. And try to smush the feelings down. Well, that's not how our brain works. You can't just shut it off like that. What I've been learning more recently is how to properly address those thoughts properly that are doubts, that are anxieties, and it's kind of a 3-step process. The first one is to soothe. So take that one for example. Your brain, your cortex can determine if that is actually true or false. So take for example a tiger. I'm in a cage with a tiger, right? Now my brain can think, oh, this is terrifying, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna get eaten, right? What if that tiger has a chain on it and it can't actually reach me in the cage? I can still react, right? I can for sure react and be terrified. But the cortex, which is the rational part, can analyze that and say, okay, there's a chain on that looks structural, it's tied to an anchor in the concrete, probably safe. Mm-hmm. So the cortex can start to form statements, and those statements can help you counteract the fear that's coming on. So one needs to use the cortex or the mind to tell the limbic system it's okay, that this is not a real threat. So how that relates to the doubt part. If I have committed the unforgivable sin, my brain can analyze that, right? It's not very good at doing that in the moment, but you need to have containing statements. I'll talk about that. But the first step is to self-soothe. So if you've determined beforehand that it's not a real threat, you can soothe yourself.
Yeah.
If there is a tiger and there's no chain on it, you don't want to self-soothe because you got to do something, right? But if you determine that it isn't a real threat, but it's a perceived threat, but the fear, the doubt is still lingering, you need to self-soothe. Matt, that really sucks that you're feeling that way. That would be so terrifying if you did commit the unforgivable sin. It sucks to be alienated from God. Really, really terrible. So like there's all those self-soothing things that it's like you're trying to use your cortex to relate to your limbic system, and that calms it down, and it builds trust in the brain.
Yeah.
So
Are
as
you going
soon
to
as
go?
you do
Sorry,
that,
can I cut you off for a second? Were you going to
yeah,
go on to your other two
I
steps,
was.
or okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Would that be okay if I just kind of go back to some previous comments that you made before kind of going to
Uh,
the other two?
yeah.
Cool, good deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so some thoughts I had while you were talking is I've known people who have that kind of similar cyclical type of motion regarding their doubts, and especially in regards to faith. So a common one that I've heard is people question like, "Oh, am I really saved? Like maybe I'm not saved," even though the Bible has certain promises when it comes to you know securing our salvation in Christ and things like that. And the person can even acknowledge that there are those passages that can help them through those times. But still, they go through this cycle of having those thoughts of, oh, I don't know if I'm actually saved. Especially with people who have similar conditions to what you've experienced. So, yeah, I think that's a helpful thing. And for you, it was the unforgivable sin, which is pretty similar. It's like if you commit the sin, then you're going to be separated from God, and that's not what you want. And that's a very emotional
Right.
thing as well. That
Oh, for
you don't want to
sure.
pursue that, right? Yeah.
Right. No, I've had that one too. Don't you worry, Jeremy. Uh, so I was going to talk about this a little bit more, but that kind of forms something called the limbic lag.
Hmm.
Um, that your limbic system can't be just retrained overnight. It takes time to retrain your brain. And there's neural networks in your brain, and those get stimulated, they get reinforced when you have a fear, when you have a doubt. The brain was designed very well to form these patterns. So certain neural networks in my brain that tell me that might not be a good idea, right? Or if I'm in Detroit and I'm in my car, or I should get out of here, right? Those works when it tells us correct dangers. The problem is when our brain is warning us about false dangers. So yeah, there's tons of people who have uh, doubts when it comes to salvation, things that they care about, right?
Hmm.
And we often don't have doubts about really insignificant things in our life,
Yeah.
right? Why is that? It's
Yeah. Go
it,
ahead.
it's because uh, we don't perceive them as threats, right?
Hmm.
As a Christian, not being saved by God is one of the scariest things, right?
Yeah.
To be known but not loved, to be known and not saved that's scary, right?
Hmm.
Rejected, right? And I've had a lot of friends who have told me that, like, um, yeah, countless people that have those same fears, and we oftentimes think that, oh, this should just go away with a prayer. Well, when you look at the biology of how the brain is, it takes a lot of work. And that's what I'm learning out, that you can't just assume that the brain is going to change overnight. And God doesn't do all of the hard work for us. Sometimes we have to change ourselves, right? That's what being a disciple is, right? They got up and they did something. They followed Christ. Paul talks about spiritual training, physical training. Sometimes there's crossover between the two of those. So, all right. So soothing is the first one. Do you have any more comments before we move on to the second one?
Nope, I
The
don't think
second
so.
point? Okay. So the second one is validation. So validation is the next step. So as soon as you've had some statements to yourself or to other people, like if you had that doubt that if you're really saved, Jeremy, what I would do as a friend would be, Jeremy, that sounds really, really hard. Very, very tough to go through. That's like the most important thing to you. Um, so it will be okay. I'm here for you. There's all these things that help soothe people. So the next thing is to validate what they're feeling. Jeremy, if that were true and you were not saved by God, it totally makes sense that you feel that way. It makes sense that you're scared, you're afraid, you're lonely, and I tell myself that when I'm going through stuff, that, man, it makes sense you feel that way. It's okay to struggle, it's okay to not have all the things in your life put together, right? And God doesn't expect you to either. It's okay to struggle. If we see the disciples, they did, right? The church wasn't perfect. People aren't perfect. So validation is the second step in terms of trying to get your body calmed down and to not reinforce those neural networks when you have a false threat. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So then number 3 is structure. So structure is developing containing statements. It is looking at false thinking patterns and cognitive distortions. I have a thing here where I have listed cognitive distortions, and I will read them off, and this helps you think through, okay, is that fall under one of these cognitive distortions? So the first one is all or nothing thinking. You look at things in absolute black and white categories. Now, some things, truth is in itself exclusive. So you need to tread lightly in how you think that. You can't be partly saved or not saved, so that makes sense. But is the fear response, is that all or nothing thinking? So say you were in a cage with a tiger and you're thinking, my life is over. This is going to be, scary, and blah, 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 blah. Your brain can go on a rabbit trail of all of these things, and that's not grounded to reality at all. So take the coronavirus. That's the big news thing right now. So take that one. So you could think, okay, coronavirus is coming. I'm going to die. Everyone I know is going to die. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to have TP. What am I going to wipe my butt with? I'm not going to be clean. I'm going to get all sorts of stuff. Oh, there's no food at the grocery stores. I'm going to starve to death even if I don't get coronavirus. So like this absolute thinking that I am going to die. Not, you know, it might be tough for a little bit. There's going to be struggle. People are going to die, but God has it, and I can help others who are struggling.
Yeah.
Now, number two is overgeneralization. So you view a negative event as a never-ending pattern of defeat. So, say at work you have a bad meeting or you say something stupid, you might think, I'm only going to say stupid stuff in meetings, or I can't do this if I failed. We see this in kids all the time. Sometimes it's a little elusive in our own behavior, but it's for sure there.
Right.
Three is mental filter, where you dwell on negatives and ignore the positives. Number four is discounting the positives, like insisting that your accomplishments or positive qualities don't count. Number five is jumping to conclusions. That's a big one,
Yeah.
right? That I'm feeling this, therefore it must be true. I'm feeling I'm not saved, therefore I must not be saved. So there's a lot of things. Number six is magnification or minimization. So you blow things way out of proportion, or you don't think about them at all. Emotional reasoning. So that's kind of what I was talking about before. That I feel like this, so I am. It's going from a if this, I am. So you're using a statement to provide an ontic to yourself when that's not justified. Should statements like I should have, should not have, I shouldn't have done that unforgivable sin, I shouldn't have done this, blah, 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 blah. Labeling yourself, so you could call yourself name, other people names, and then personalization and blame. So those are kind of the cognitive distortions. So if you have this perpetual doubt, you can analyze it with those distortions. Then you need to, as soon as you do that, come up with some more structure, and that's in terms of containing statements. So finding good concrete ways that is not true, and provide some alternatives. So we talked a little bit about assurance of salvation, right? There are verses in the Bible that talk about as soon as you accept Christ, you are saved, and it is faith in God, da 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 da. So you need to come up with containing statements that you need to use when those fears and doubts come up. So as soon as those fears and doubts come up, soothe, validate, and then use the containing statements. It's very powerful.
Yeah.
But it's not going to happen overnight. You need to change your behavior over the long term because of the limbic lag. Your limbic system doesn't change overnight. You have to retrain it. So just think, if you needed to train for a marathon, you can't just do that overnight. Or say you broke your leg or sprained your Achilles heel, right? That's not going to heal overnight. And your brain is also a biological system. That's also not going to change overnight. So you need to do the hard work of removing those cognitive distortions and those neural networks that are causing the doubt. Now, there's actually some very famous perpetual doubters. Martin Luther was a very good example, getting scrupulosity and guilt before God and couldn't find a way to get rid of it, to the point where his priest just would not want to hear him confess his sins, because it would be just endless lists, and then you hop out and then you hop right back in and saying, oh, I thought of one more thing as I stepped out. And that actually drove some good things. So not all doubt is bad. It can provide a lot of growth in one's life.
Right, definitely.
So, I've been doing a lot of thinking about the thought backing to be able to think properly. You think about Ephesians 6:8, where it talks about to think about all of these things, all things that are, I think I have it pulled up here. Oh, Philippians 4:8. Let me pull this up. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And there's countless verses not worrying, about doubts. So if we were just follow that, we wouldn't have all these problems. And I think one step higher is to realize that it's okay to struggle and it's okay to have doubts. They aren't descriptive or prescriptive about who you are.
Mm-hmm.
That if you have doubts, it doesn't mean you're a bad Christian. Thomas had doubt, and Christ met him where he was at.
And I'm sorry, I set up a setting that caused us to drop out now or soon. But yes, Matt, I wanted to just cover the three main areas that you talked about in terms of how to deal with these types of thoughts. So can you list them off again, the three kind of things to focus on or do?
Right. So when you have a doubt and you determine that it is not a true doubt or not a true threat, is one, you need to soothe. So you need to self-soothe
Mm-hmm.
in terms of that would be really scary, and realize what the situation is. Matt, it's okay. That is really scary. It makes sense that you'd be feeling that way because it's threatened something you really, really care about.
Mm-hmm.
And just go on that path. And then the third one is providing structure. So by providing structure, you list the cognitive distortion that your brain is going through when it's thinking about that, and then coming up with a containing statement. Have those same perpetual doubts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you mentioned possibly writing a blog post on this topic or something to share, and I think that would be very helpful to have those ideas in mind and be able to go back to a resource like that. So yeah, thanks for sharing those things. That, I mean, this has come from a long process for you of going through these very difficult doubts of something very
It's been
emotional.
excruciating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we just thank you for your wisdom and sharing the results, or at least the current results of going through that process.
Mm-hmm. No problem.
Yeah. So yeah, again, we've kind of cut in and out, and I'm trying to figure that out. But if you're still watching, if you could just send us a quick comment and let us know, that would be helpful. I think I'm going to share some things, and we'll see where to take it from there. We might close it out. And perhaps this will lead to an in-person meeting at some point about this topic too. This is a good starting point, I think, but there's a lot to cover in regards to this topic about doubt. And not only that, but we've had cases of, let's say, like deconversion stories, and definitely the whole concept of doubt very much plays into that topic as well. And that's something else we could definitely cover over the course of time. So I'm going to share a few comments, and yeah, we'll take it from there. So I started to experience doubt about my faith actually through YouTube, I would say, to start out. Because back in the before 2010, when you would go to Christian worship videos and you look at the comments on YouTube, there would just be a long string of essentially a religious debate. Not exactly the thing you'd expect to be on a Christian worship song, but that was just the nature of YouTube at that time. So I grew up a Christian, and seeing some of those things, I heard things for the first time that I just never heard or thought to consider before. Things like Jesus never existed was a big one. And reading some of those things and trying to engage in discussion, and clearly I didn't know what I was talking about at times, definitely caused me to doubt and have kind of a crisis moment in the sense of faith. So thankfully, through that experience, God brought about connections through YouTube even where people started encouraging me to really dig into this material or these questions about God and his existence and Jesus Christ. And really, I've been in the process since that time. But definitely in those early stages, I had quite a bit of doubt, which really, I would say, increased watching different videos or looking at different content. So one series of videos was talking about how Paul, the Apostle Paul, you probably know he wrote some letters that we have in the New Testament now. This series of videos said that Paul thought Jesus was a spiritual being, like up in a certain level of heaven. And Paul, during the course of his letters, talked about Jesus coming down and, having a physical appearance. So basically the whole thing about God coming down in the first century through Jesus didn't happen. And Paul acknowledged that and saw Jesus as a spiritual being. And that is a view that is still out there to some extent. But like that series of videos going through that caused me to doubt more. And that one of the connections from YouTube really helped me think through that series properly. So that's one example, but others came up over time of periods of doubt. So I doubted when it came to the topic of evolution and, does this basically disprove Christianity? There's definitely a period of that. More recently, I've had some doubts when it comes to atheists, or you could say naturalists, talking about there's basically no empirical evidence for God, and that should really make us question things. And that's a whole nother topic we can get into, right? So I would say having doubts about those topics or just doubt in general is not a bad thing. And like Matt said earlier, can be a beneficial and positive thing in that it helps us to realize, I think I need to really dig into this particular topic more and just really understand what I think about this area that is apparently causing me to doubt. So that leads me to what I've learned through this process. And I definitely have been helped by other people discussing and writing about this topic, especially Gary Habermas. A lot of you may know him. He is an expert on Jesus' resurrection, but also writes extensively about doubt and what you can call the different types of doubt. So there's two main types of doubt that he talks about. There's intellectual, which you could say is some of the stuff I talked about of did Paul talk about a spiritual being when he talked about Jesus? Is there really no empirical proof of God? And what does that mean in terms of the Christian faith? And there can be legitimate intellectual doubts that come up from that may lead one into exploring those topics more. And perhaps like over time, maybe finding out that what they thought earlier is not, at least to their perspective now, is not actually the case. So I think there can be a legitimate track down that path of having doubt and then changing one's view over time as a result of that intellectual doubt. But at the same time, I don't think we need to assume or pretend, let's say, that intellectual doubt is in a vat and nothing else is affecting it. And that gets into the other type of doubts that Gary and other people have talked about, which is emotional doubt, which can basically be a condition like Matt discussed, or something going on in the background in your life, or perhaps a past pain that's leading to a certain psychological condition now, or a psychological state, I should say. And that emotional doubt through those events or circumstances can have a huge effect on the way we think, even when it comes to intellectual topics like the one I described. So the question is then, how do we differentiate between this intellectual doubt and this emotional doubt? And there's a few factors that we can consider to to make that assessment. One big one, I think, would be really a matter of timing. Because when I go through these periods of doubt that I talked about with evolution or, is there empirical evidence for God, a lot of times I have the thoughts and it makes me think, oh, maybe Christianity isn't true, and I have these doubts about it. But oftentimes, as I start to hear people talking about the topic and as just other life circumstantial things happen, that doubt really goes away and pretty much goes away or completely or to a large extent. To me, that is an indication that there is some sort of like emotional doubt or emotional sense of something happening. Where, yes, the intellectual part was there, and it's a question that I might want to explore more or that I don't quite know what I totally think about it yet. But in terms of that getting to the point of doubting everything when it comes to my belief system in, let's say, the truth of Christianity, it ends up not overtaking that. Basically, there are probably other factors leading up to me having this doubt. But over time, let's say you have this intellectual doubt, and over time it kind of sticks with you, and it doesn't really go away in terms of that specific topic. I think that's a pretty good indicator that there is primarily intellectual doubt going on. Because, emotions fluctuate pretty frequently. Even like weekly emotions, 1 week can change the next week. But if you have this long string of doubts about a specific topic that has an intellectual nature to it, I think that's a sign that there is definitely a large extent of intellectual doubt happening. So that is just one factor out of many to consider with differentiating emotional and intellectual doubt. There are others as well. So as I say this, I have these intellectual doubts about these topics, and there's probably emotions mixed in. But because I have the doubts, that doesn't mean I suddenly think, oh, this whole Christianity thing is not true, or that this particular topic is going to lead me down the slippery slope of losing my faith. I think when you hear these deconversion stories, sometimes there seems to be that one topic that does become kind of a breaking point where it leads the person down that path. But just because you have that doubt about that intellectual thing in that moment does not mean that you're automatically going to go on that path. So I think that's helpful in terms of Christians not having this fear over doubting, where it's like, okay, I have this doubt, so therefore I'm under threat that I'm going to lose my faith, essentially. I don't think we need to be concerned about that. And there's plenty of other reasons to think that doubting is okay. Of course, there's plenty of examples in Scripture of people doubting God, especially through circumstances that are very emotional. In David in the Psalms going through some battles and doubting God in the sense of where is he in this moment. So those are really some of my main thoughts about the topic of doubt. And really, it comes down to an assessment of what is the doubt I'm going through? What is the nature of the doubt? Is it this more intellectual doubt? Is it emotional doubt? Is it maybe a mix of both? And maybe time will help tell that story or give you that answer. So does that any of that strike something to you, Matt, or anything else? Anyone else on the chat?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think I've had a combination of both. One intellectual doubt that I had was on time, God's foreknowledge, and yeah, it kind of stuck with me. It actually wasn't very emotional, which is interesting compared to all of my other emotional doubts.
Mm-hmm.
I really wasn't like super concerned about it, but it was always like there, like I wonder how that works. Like, so then I went through and I read books and posts by some experts, and dug into some of the deep topics on how to reconcile these things. And I found a solution, and that like I haven't thought about it again because I was able to address it and find the solution and the truth.
Hmm.
Sometimes it can be hard to differentiate the two, and sometimes they go together, right? Right?
Yep.
You can have emotional doubt driven from an intellectual doubt,
Yeah, or vice versa, definitely.
and vice versa.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, no, that all makes sense. And like doubt is useful because, if you don't doubt anything, you're probably not going to grow. You're probably not going to learn anything, right?
Hmm.
You're just going to take something at face value, and that's about it, right? You're not going to grow. You're going to live in this small little bubble. And you know, I know plenty of people when if you ask them questions about their worldview, Christians and non-Christians, sometimes they just blow up and they don't know how to work with external thoughts, external doubts.
Hmm.
So I think that's really a skill that we can really put into effect of how to handle people when um, they are not accepting of new ideas, or if it's us. I, of course, have at times where I'm not accepting of other people's opinions. Um, but that is a boundaries thing, right? So if we have really bad boundaries, we're probably not going to do well with people uh, attacking our beliefs or, providing suggestions. Sometimes they might have the bad boundaries and overstep in trying to convince us uh, of something. We did that whole thing on tactics, and
Hmm.
uh, steamrolling was a big one of them, right?
Hmm.
Where someone comes in and they just plow through, and they're not being very respectful of you and your beliefs. So that's one example of bad boundaries on someone else's part.
Yeah.
Um,
That boundaries area is definitely a big one to consider. So for me, as an example, because of past things and personality and different factors, I have a tendency to conform to what other people say a lot. So essentially, sometimes like other people's thoughts about something almost become my own thoughts. Um, I guess I could steal their thoughts, you could say, and they're not my own thoughts. They're just like someone else, and I'm like, because of this personal
Connection with
perhaps
them.
fear I have of like, oh, I really need to conform to this person, that those thoughts can just basically, enter in and become my own. So that really plays into the doubt I'm talking about with intellectual topics of Christianity, because I get immersed in this discussion of God's existence and people giving arguments for and against. Um, and sometimes the looking at those arguments against God and seeing what people say, like that can enter my mind and almost again become my own thoughts just for a brief period. Almost
Mhm.
like test driving them. I don't know what you could say, but anyway, like that emotional tendency to conform to other people and their thoughts and beliefs, at least for a brief moment, can also drive that doubt behind things. And that's another layer that adds complexity to like assessing, am I truly experiencing intellectual doubt here, or is there this emotional side, in this case the need to please people essentially, and uh, connect with their thoughts in some way.
Right, and that can be a hard thing to learn, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've been learning boundaries, and it's kind of a bumpy road, um, and that in itself is okay. But I totally get that. That's like is that at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where it's like, uh, uh, am I getting that mixed up? Where you are able to take on someone else's thoughts and someone else's perspective, and then analyze it
Mm-hmm.
without holding it to be your own. and that's like the highest form of maturity. But sometimes it can go wrong you uh, when you just go to that as your default,
Mm-hmm.
right? You need to be thinking about someone else's perspective, and it's super useful, and it shows that you have ability to empathize with someone if you can take on their thoughts and their struggles and their perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that in itself can be a very powerful tool, and that can help you relate to someone else. Like if someone is having a doubt, then you can sue them, you can validate them, and then you can help them with the structure to help them with right thinking.
Right. So that's another positive thing or an advantage you could say of going through times of doubt. So for me, I'm not saying that this path that I can take of seeing opposing views and them causing me to question, oh, is this really what I think about this topic? So I'm not saying that process is all bad. One advantage of going through that and going through it on a constant basis is I can identify easily with people going through intense doubt, people who are skeptics.
Mm-hmm.
I can identify with those people perhaps in a unique way that not every Christian can necessarily. So I think I had a tweet about this recently. It's like it's difficult to go through that constantly, kind of questioning what you believe and constantly going through that process. But I
Mm-hmm.
believe the difficulty is worth it. In my case, of pursuing this path of being able to make a connection with these specific people, going through these things, doubts and whatnot, and being able to show them Christ in small ways in those interactions with them. Yeah. So thanks for pointing that out. Just that
Well, it
advantage.
builds tenacity, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're able to confront an idea and uh, not lose it, not freak out, right?
Yeah.
So, um, like in my work, uh, there's people who are challenging to work with, but I've noticed that the first time I deal with that person, it can be terrible. I've had uh, scenarios where someone is yelling at someone else. I was in a meeting and there's this young guy who brought up an idea, and a staff engineer just was yelling at him like that was a stupid idea, and it was like whoa. But what happened over time is you learn how to deal with those people. So I
Mm-hmm.
learned how to work with him. Um, so when he was angry and upset at me this time, uh, it was okay because I realized that was his problem. He wasn't able to um, uh, keep a hold of himself. Um, and the same thing happens with doubt when you're able to handle that and work with that. It builds tenacity and this perseverance that allows you to connect with others when they're struggling. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a very powerful thing that, yeah, I've gone through something and I can help someone now with their struggle without being completely sucked in, right? You've built
Yeah.
some maturity, you've built some coping mechanisms to be able to handle that, right? You're just getting stronger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, I think we got to a really good point in our discussion here of something I was going to bring up, but we just got to it of really for Christians, just how to think about this topic of doubt. And is this something Christians should be worried about, or just what should the Christian response be to it? And I think we talked about some key advantages that doubt, it has a negative stigma in the church often. And even as I'm talking and sharing these things of, oh yeah, I go through this pretty constant process of coming across different views and kind of questioning things and all that. Um, there's a negative stigma in the church about doubt. And that's one reason why it's very important to talk about this topic because everyone experiences it, but there's sometimes a lack of talking about it in the church, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, so it's good to talk about the advantages of doubt so that people can start thinking about okay, when I go through these moments of doubt, is this something I should just see as all bad and just be worried? Like you said, the panic thing, you start having this sense of panic about this experience I'm having. Or can I see two different sides to it? I can see, yeah, this is really difficult and it can be a very emotional thing like you shared with your story, but it can also be a good thing in some ways and have advantages, especially when it comes to connecting with people who are going or will be going through those same experiences.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Uh, I would say that one needs to make sure they don't fester. I think that's kind of the root of how people don't deal with them properly.
Mm-hmm.
If you just try to stuff them down and not actually do the work to address your emotional or intellectual doubt and let them fester, that's when you're going to get into issues. You're going to get alienated. You're not going to uh, feel like God cares for you because you're like, why am I experiencing all these things? And it's kind of a victim mindset that I'm helpless to change unless God does it. When God never, uh, so God doesn't take responsibility for our thoughts, right? He's given us free will.
Mm-hmm.
That's our responsibility. So with that, you have a responsibility to not let them fester, to either identify them as intellectual or as emotional. Emotional, you can do the work to reach in your brain to address those, build tenacity,
Mm-hmm.
um, and struggle a little bit. It's fine. It's fine to do that too. Um, you need to be honest with yourself, and then when you have those intellectual questions, that's a really good opportunity to grow and to dive into something.
Right.
And it's good to ask questions, right? When you dive into something, you learn more. It spurs more questions, and asking questions helps you understand more.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's like not being afraid. That's what Christ told us to do. Don't be afraid, right?
Mm-hmm.
So does it make sense when people are afraid of doubt that it leads them to uh,
Bad places.
leave the faith, bad
Right.
places?
Uh-huh.
That's exactly what Christianity teaches.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. Like,
So that's really interesting. Like, worry about the doubt can often be what causes people to go down that path of like what leads to someone losing their faith. So I'd say in at least some cases, the fear of that doubt can be the trigger of causing that path to happen, rather than the
mhm.
doubt itself and the substance of what the doubt is about. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
And it's funny, it goes both ways. When C.S. Lewis was an atheist and he was reading all about Christianity, he realized this is actually true. And there is a funny line in his book. Trying to remember what book is it, Surprised by Joy, where he talks about he was the most reluctant convert in all of England that night,
Mm-hmm.
where he was brought into the kingdom not joyful and happy, but kicking and screaming. He actually had to do the work to change his mindset when he found something that was true. He had to train his mind to uh, uh, accept that that was true. He had knowledge, but he didn't have understanding.
Right.
Um, so yeah, head to heart.
Yeah, for sure. So let's see if there's something we want to cover here. Um, let's just end with this question. And I don't know how much audience we have right now or not, but since it's on my mind, I'll say we are going to repost this. So, we had the difficulties and that definitely caused a drop in who could see this or not. But we will definitely post this at least on the Twin Cities Apologetics Facebook group. Perhaps cut it a little bit so some of the tech stuff is gone, so then people can listen to the conversation after, because I think there are definitely some valuable insights here, as I expected in this conversation with Matt. Okay, so the question I wanted to talk about, and then we can probably wrap up, is should doubt about, say, an intellectual topic about our faith cause us to think what we believe isn't true? So it's kind of the thing I talked about earlier of I have this doubt about Paul's letters or some aspect of the Bible. Should that lead us to have the mindset of, oh, maybe all this stuff I believed in isn't actually true? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, let's look at that list of cognitive distortions,
Mm-hmm.
right? Jumping to conclusions,
Mm,
overgeneralization, all or nothing thinking, right?
right.
Emotional reasoning. I feel this way, therefore it must be true.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if one used that list of cognitive distortions, you can clearly identify that that is not the correct thinking, that needs some work. And for me, I'm kind of fortunate that I have more OCDs than just religious fears. So that helps me corroborate that um, that this is true. That I know in the non spiritual stuff, uh, I have the same thinking, same processes in my brain for things that um, are, you know, very well known, and I know that I feel that these things are not true. So take for example, I am a hypochondriac. So there, there's like there's fears that I have, and they feel so real, and they do feel real. Like um, yeah, this is probably embarrassing, but last year, when I was in a very uh, in a state where I was so stimulated, my stress response was so high. I had a lot of cognitive distortions. I had a lot of bad thinking, and I thought I had MS,
Hmm.
ALS, Meniere's disease,
Wow.
and all of those. I can tell you, like my brain was telling me, Matt, you have all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Those weren't actually true,
Mm-hmm.
but uh, those were in a sense doubts in my thinking. But just because you have a doubt doesn't mean they're true. And if you go through those steps, you use your cortex to uh, analyze things. If they're true, then you can self-soothe, then you can validate, and then you can use that structure to change your thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say absolutely not true that if you have a doubt, therefore the fear behind the doubt is true. That's definitely uh, uh, not true.
Sure.
Um, and then there's one more thing wanted to add
Yeah.
of something that I've been learning recently is uh, meditation is very powerful because what it does is it increases uh, brain density in the cortex. There's a study that they came from Stanford where they studied people who meditated a couple times a week, and they objectively saw that there was uh, more brain growth in the cortex, and there was reduction in the amygdala. So what that tells you is if you meditate more often, you're not going to be driving as many of those emotional doubts, and you're going to have more emotional stability to be able to think things through rationally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I'll share a few thoughts myself. Should doubt cause us to think what we believe isn't true? And I agree with a lot of your sentiments about that, especially what you could say is overreacting or jumping to conclusions, you know, said in a different way. I think that can definitely happen in that circumstance, especially if you have a structure where you have your whole system of belief, right? And there's a sense of, I don't want to say certainty, but I'm going to say cohesiveness, where it's like you think that if any one piece of that system is taken out or that is put into question, that permeates throughout the entire system. So, there's examples that I could point to, but I think that's just the mindset and expectations regarding one's belief system, I think, can affect how people respond to doubt. With that said, when it comes to Christianity and Christians going through doubts, I think you just need to look at what are the mere Christianity foundations. What are the central claims of Christianity, and are those true? It basically surrounds the history behind Jesus and his life, and claims definitely to some extent, and then death and resurrection, and those things happening in history. Really, the apostles and the people who started Christianity, if you read the Acts of the Apostles, what they talked about after those events, that's really what they laid their faith on. That was the foundation behind it. So if we really dig into those topics of Jesus' death and resurrection, did those things happen? And we can find that there is at least adequate reason to think that that we can accept those things as true, then that's really our foundation when it comes to just the central claims and holding on to our faith in Christ. With that said, there are a lot of other topics and difficulties that people can bring up surrounding the Bible, surrounding science and faith, which is something we are going to talk about sometime in our group, and a whole host of things. And perhaps, a big story or a common story that people have is they had all these different doubts about all these topics, and they just couldn't handle it. They couldn't overcome the accumulation of doubts that came through those things. So with that, it's I understand, I sympathize with that. There's a whole bunch of questions you can look at in so many different topics. But I would say for Christians, just go back to those foundational things of the life and death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I would say, too, that the collection of or accumulation of doubts can happen within any belief system or any worldview. So if you go, say, to the atheist side and think, oh, this will solve my doubting problem, it won't necessarily do that, because you have a lot of other questions, or a lot of different questions to address, of origins, a basis for morality. Just not that those things can't be answered by atheists, but those are questions that can lead to doubt and just things that need to be answered to some extent. And it's the same on the Christian side too. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thoughts. But anyway, just because you leave Christianity and go to something else doesn't mean that those doubts will go away. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem. So it's something else to keep in mind with the topic. So Matt, do you have any other thoughts regarding doubts and your story and just things that you would want people to leave with?
I would say to people that they should really hang on for longer, try some techniques out in terms of how to handle doubt. And if they are feeling overwhelmed, they can really go talk to someone.
Mm-hmm.
And don't always seek reassurance for a topic, but seek reassurance that you're capable of learning about it, because you can feel so defeated that there's all of these doubts. How do I handle all of them? Well, set some time aside to investigate some of them. Realize maybe I don't have to learn about all of these. So I would encourage people just to do that. That's about all I am.
Yeah, I would agree with those steps, practical steps to take. Talking with people who are close, especially about what you're going through, not holding those things in. I think that's a good principle. Whether we're talking about this, maybe even just life struggles, dating struggles, like anything, giving it out, to putting it out there to someone who you know and trust is much better than holding it in. There's also
Right.
journaling, getting those thoughts out in another way can be helpful.
Mhm.
Going to a psychologist, especially if you're going through extreme emotional doubt, or you think there might be potential for that, that can be a hugely helpful thing in the process of wrestling through the thoughts that you have, especially the cyclical type of thoughts like Matt discussed earlier. Um,
And
so,
read some books, right?
yeah.
Cloud and Townsend, Boundaries.
Hmm.
Read some books on how to address doubt and read about the brain and how it works.
Yeah. Boundaries is a big one for sure. And like I said, Gary Habermas has a lot of resources on this topic.
Mhm.
You can just search Gary Habermas doubt, and that will lead you to some resources to check out too. Okay. Well, thanks for everyone who joined us. Everyone who initially joined us and dropped out, unfortunately, because of tech stuff. We appreciate you just wanting to join in and be part of the discussion. So again, we will post this, especially in our Facebook group, for your viewing later on. And yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Definitely let us know if you have any questions. Also, if you're going through anything with the coronavirus stuff, like I said in email earlier that I sent out, contact us. We want to be here for you and in whatever your needs are, whether it's a struggle or a question about faith, even like financial type of stuff. We can help you get connected to
I
whoever
love
you might.
finances, so talk to me.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, email is twincitiesapologetics@gmail.com. Otherwise, Facebook or Instagram messaging, if you know how to do that, that's a perfect way to do that as well. Okay, so I think we're going to sign off for the night. We may do more of these. Hopefully, this is what's kind of a test tonight, but hopefully, you can kind of get the right format to do this more efficiently in. Otherwise, if you're in the TCA group, we will definitely meet in person again whenever we are able to. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Okay, thanks for joining me tonight, Matt. I enjoyed
hmm
talking about this
It
important
was great.
topic.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's a
Absolutely.
lot of fun.
Definitely. All right. Well, you have a good night, Matt, and good night to
You
everyone else.
too.
All right.
Bye, guys.